What's up YouTube? KS Gun Guy here. Thanks for joining me today as always. If you like what you see here, do be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And there's plenty more content on the way. So I'm excited to bring you another installment of the If I Could Only Have One series. And in this series, I take two firearms, whether very similar or in some cases very different, and I compare and contrast these firearms. I look at things like the overall specs of the firearms, the features, what the value is. Of course, I'll be wheeling and shooting along the way. We'll take a look a little bit at the triggers and compare and contrast those. And at the end, I will announce a winner. Now, here's the thing. This does not mean that one gun is necessarily better than the other. I like them both. I think they're both great. If you own either one of these, man, you've got great guns either way. But I think it's really fun to take a step back and think about your collection and look at a couple of guns and say, you know, if I could only keep one of those guns, which one would it be and why? So all of this is really opinion and just for fun, but I enjoy doing this. It seems like you guys are enjoying these as well. So we're doing another one, and today's video is going to feature the Glock 26. Of course, it is unloaded with an unloaded magazine, and the HK VP9SK. Now, I've been recording this video over and over again for about the past 3 weeks or so, and for whatever reason, it hasn't hit just yet. I'm hoping this is the run here, and this is the winner. I tend to try and do one takes if at all possible, just to be transparent with you. And my buddy Headshot 87 just did a comparison very similar to this not too long ago, and be sure to check out that video as well. And kind of re-inspired me to go back and take a look at these guns because I've been thinking about doing this for a while now. So in terms of the overall specs, how are they similar and how are they different? They are relatively similar, but basically the HK VP9SK is going to be just a little bit bigger all the way around. So the Glock 26 is going to be 6.41 inches versus the 6.61 inches of the HK. From a height standpoint, the Glock 26 stands at 4.17 inches versus the 4.57 inches of the HK. And then from a width standpoint, we've got basically 1.2 inches on the Glock 26 versus 1.31 inches on the HK. The barrels are almost the same length, 3.42 inches on the barrel on the Glock versus the 3.39 on the SK. Now, in terms of weight, here's where we start to get just a little bit different. The unloaded weight on the Glock 26 is 21.71 ounces versus the 23.07 ounces on the SK. So the HK, for the most part, is just a little bit bigger all the way around. So let's go ahead and take a look at the features of the firearms and see where they are similar in some cases, but in a lot of cases pretty darn different. So this Glock 26 is built on the Gen 4 frame, so it's got your Gen 4 texture all the way around, and it does have interchangeable back straps of various sorts, some of which have a beaver tail that do extend that beaver tail out a little bit more if you've got a little extra meat on your hands back there to protect you from slide bite. But the overall texture, and I've always said Glock Gen 4 texture is pretty good. We've got the pyramids that are, I guess, kind of a light, medium, aggressive, and then these little side squares right here that I would say are kind of light, aggressive, but it's definitely, I think, an improvement on the Gen 3 frame. There's just a little bit more bite there. Now you'll notice that there are finger grooves here, and only two finger grooves because this is a subcompact firearm, so you're not going to be able to get a full grip with your flat base magazine on there. But I think those finger grooves do help keep your fingers in place. Now, I know a lot of people do undercut that frame a little bit more to get your hand up a little bit higher on the frame, but either way, I think this grip definitely works. Now, moving up the grip, we do have the magazine release, and it's changeable to be ambidextrous, but out of the box it is only for righties. Either way, you can change that out, which is nice. Now, the slide lock, slide release, this also is not going to be ambidextrous, and you cannot change it around. So it's just for righties on that feature. Now, the gun does not have any sort of an accessory rail for lights, lasers, grenade launchers, anything like that. So any aftermarket lights or lasers that you get are going to have to really hang on to the trigger guard and not any sort of an accessory rail there. From a slide standpoint, you do have back slide serrations right here, but not front slide serrations. Now, I've always said that the texture, at least on the Gen 4 Glocks, is pretty good. So long as the gun is relatively dry and so are your hands, you definitely can make it work, but the back serrations work very well. Now, from a sights perspective, unfortunately, these are not the stock sights. I did switch them out, and I'll explain why. Well, actually, I'll just explain it now. Glocks generally come with the field goal polymer sights, and I've always said that changing out Glock sights is, at least in my opinion, the first thing that should be changed on the firearm. And if you don't change anything else, I would at least change those sights out to get some good quality steel sights, and preferably maybe some night sights like these Trijicon HDs, or something else. Now, these are a little bit more pricey, but there are certainly some more economical sights that are fantastic, like Meprolites and that sort of thing. So either way, changing out the sights. But when we talk about value, of course, that does add to the bottom line right there. Now, at the end of the day, you don't have to change the sights, but again, a recommendation for me. So that's the overall features of the firearm. Of course, the trigger does have your safety dingus, but this is just a stock trigger, nothing special or anything about it. In fact, all of these components are stock aside from the sights. Now for the HK is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit different all the way around. So in terms of the grip, now the HK does have your standard sort of squigglies or little bananas that you've got going all the way around. And I've always said that the HK texture on this is just fine. I think it's smooth enough to be comfortable, but it's aggressive enough to keep enough of a purchase on the firearm. But some other things that help aid in that purchase, now it also does have finger grooves like the Glock does. I think they're a little bit more subtle, so they don't quite lock your fingers in just as much. An advantage of that is if you've got bigger fingers, it's maybe perhaps a little bit more comfortable, but again, your mileage may vary. And then, of course, there is a little bit of kind of a grip protrusion as you look all the way around the grip. So it is certainly molded for sort of the average hand here. And speaking of grip and average hands, like the Glock, it does have some modularity in its grip, although it does it a little bit differently. It does have a back strap that you can slide off with just removing a roll pin right here. But then there are two side straps that also can be removed and changed out as well. So you've got small, medium, and large for all three of these plates for a total of 27 different combinations. So once again, grip modularity like the Glock, doing it a little bit differently, and I would say probably makes it a little bit more maybe custom out of the box, which is kind of nice, so you can mix and match to match your hand size. Another feature of the HK is going to be just a little bit of an indention right here on both sides of the grip to be able to grab a magazine if for some reason you have a malfunction. The Glock does not have that, so a little bit of an advantage there for the HK. Now, in terms of its magazine release, it is ambidextrous out of the box. Now, it's going to be your European-style magazine release, so you've got the paddles on both sides. Now, I find that my thumbs just aren't quite long enough to reach comfortably without dramatically changing my grip. So I actually use, believe it or not, my middle finger. That seems to be very comfortable, and I can get my grip reacquired pretty quickly. And I know a lot of people also use their trigger finger, which is certainly doable. I find the middle finger to be a little bit more comfortable for that. But either way, it's ambidextrous out of the box, and with a little bit of practice and a little bit of a different technique, perhaps, you can really make that work for you. The slide lock slide release is ambidextrous out of the box, so it is good to go for lefties all the way around, which is kind of nice. Now, one thing I didn't talk about with the Glock as far as takedowns, and I'm not going to take the guns down in this particular video. I've done that before, so in the interest of time, I won't this time. But the Glock does have the standard takedown levers. You do have to pull the trigger to be able to do that, but then you're able to slide the gun right off. I find Glocks to be extremely easy to take down and also to maintain. Now, the HK, you do have to lock the slide back, and then you pull down on your takedown tab. You do not actually have to pull the trigger. You would just yank it right off, and you're good to go there, which is kind of nice. Now, both guns do have stainless steel guide rods. I also wanted to make sure that I mentioned that as well. The accessory rail, you do have an accessory rail for lights, lasers, grenade launchers on the HK. So if you do want to have a light or anything like that, whether you carry or maybe it's home defense, the HK perhaps does have a little bit of an advantage out of the box. So you've got a few more choices perhaps to be able to mount to the HK versus just on the trigger guard on the Glock. Now from a slide perspective, you do have serrations on both the front and the back, and I find that these serrations are fantastic. They both work very, very well to manipulate the slide. Now the HK also has one other unique feature about it when we talk about serrations. It actually has these little polymer ears right here that are attached to the firearm, although they are removable if you don't like them, even though I find them to be fantastic and very usable. I thought they were gimmicky at first when I first saw the original VP9, but now I really like them. However, if you want to remove them, all you have to do is take off the rear sight, then you can actually just pop these right off, which is good. I don't know if there's any sort of a cover, if they leave a hole. I've never seen one with these off, but I imagine if there's a need for that, I'm sure there's an aftermarket part for it as well. From a sights perspective, this is the LE model, so this does have night sights on it, which is nice, but again, we'll talk about value here in a moment for that. These do have a nice ledge for one-handed manipulations as well. Guns do have 3 10-round magazines out of the box. One thing that's a little bit different about the HK versus the Glock, the HK, 2 of the magazines actually have a finger extension, although not a +1 or +2, which is a little bit of a bummer. At least there's an extension versus the Glock that just has the 3 regular base plates on it. So before we continue this, let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit of shooting and see how these guys do. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that footage at the range. So I took both of these guns and compared them side by side with each other, and I will admit, and as you guys know if you've been following my channel, I take you guys with me almost every time I shoot. I film just about every time. So you see the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it, and I generally don't edit out bad shots. I keep it all in because I'm human and I'm kind of an average defensive shooter, really, certainly not a bullseye shooter or anything like that. I didn't have a very good day with either of these firearms for whatever reason. Now, the Glock 26, I tend to have a love-hate relationship from a shooting perspective. Some days I'm really on and I shoot quite well, or at least from my standards, I shoot pretty well. But for whatever reason, I just didn't connect very well with this on that particular day. And then with the HK VP9SK, I generally shoot this very well. I like HK VP9s and generally am quite comfortable with shooting them. In fact, they're probably some of my better guns that I shoot. Once again, for whatever reason, I just didn't connect with this quite as well. So I'm also wheeling in some shooting on some other days as well, just to kind of balance that out. And if nothing else, make me feel better about myself. But anyways, both are great shooters, and they're certainly accurate, more accurate than this shooter is without a question there. So speaking of shooting, let's go ahead and take a look at the triggers here for just a moment or two. This is not going to be a terrifically deep dive into the triggers because I think we've spent a lot of time with not only Glock triggers, but also VP9 triggers. Once again, I said this is a totally stock trigger. Without question it is, and I can feel it even just in the uptake. Now, it's a smooth uptake, there's no question, but I feel a fair amount of resistance, and I get to that very well-known wall that Glocks have. I mean, it's very defined right here, and when I push through to get to my break, and that's I measured it off camera, and it was right around 6.5 pounds, just a hair less than that on average. But that's your pull, and then your reset. There's your reset right there. Now, one thing I really like about Glocks is the reset. I think the reset is very good. It's audible and it's tactile. It's not necessarily the shortest reset out there. There are some guns that have better short resets, but in terms of feedback to the user, I think Glocks do a fantastic job. So one more time on that trigger. There's your uptake, fair amount of resistance, and you get to your wall. There's your break. And then your reset. And then we're back to the start there. Very average Glock trigger, nothing special. I think there are definitely some better triggers out of the box than Glocks. But at the end of the day, if you spend time with Glocks and you know the triggers, they're all basically the same, and they do exactly what they're supposed to do. Now the VP9 trigger, just a little bit different. Now my buddy Spec Op 4, and I'll leave links to his channel as well as Headshot's channel, he noted that there was a little bit of a bump or a little bit of grit in the VP9SK trigger, kind of right in the middle of the uptake. And I remember when I first got this, it had the exact same bump, just a little bit of a catch there. It has worn itself off now, which is great. So I think just over time, and you know, I think this maybe has 400 or 500 rounds through it at this point. It has since broken in, which is good. So it's a very nice, comfortable, very smooth uptake right there. A little bit less resistance than the Glock, and then we get to our wall. And we get to our break. Now it does break a little bit further away from the back of the trigger housing there versus the Glock basically right up against the trigger housing, which means this has a little bit longer distance from the back of your hand or the web of your hand to your finger there. So depending on the size of your hands, that might make a difference for you. Reset standpoint, there's our reset right there. The reset's actually just a little bit further out than the Glock is, but once again, audible and tactile, maybe not quite as much as the Glock, but certainly enough feedback there, and then you get back out to the start. So we'll do that again. There's your uptake, very smooth, and there's your break. And there's your reset. Now, when I measured this off camera, this was coming in around 5 1/4, a little bit more than 5 1/4 pounds, just under 5 1/2, really. So a little bit lighter than the Glock. And VP9s, I've always said VP9s have fantastic triggers. They may not be quite as good as maybe a Walther PPQ, but they're pretty close and certainly very good. It's probably one of the reasons why I really enjoy shooting the VP9 so much, and generally speaking connect pretty well to them. Either way, both have good triggers out of the box. Again, I have to give the edge to the VP9 a little bit. It's a slightly lighter trigger, although maybe not quite as audible and tactile as the Glock. It still is a little bit lighter. So here we come to the end of the video here, and again, this is if I could only have one. So it's time to make a choice whether to go with the Glock 26 or the VP9. So the Glock 26 definitely has some great things going for it, for sure. One of the big things is going to be the size of it. Glock 26s are just really small, and if you're carrying a firearm and you're carrying it all day, the smaller the firearm, the better, but you still have pretty good capacity at 10+1 and still enough to grab onto to be able to use it. So I really like Glock 26s quite a bit. Now, the VP9SK has some unusual and really nice features about it. Definitely your grip, your ergonomics are going to be pretty much second to none. I think it's one of the better ergonomic firearms out there on the market, and a couple of extra features as well. However, we have a little bit of a stopping point here, and that's going to be value, because I haven't really talked about that yet. So Glock 26 Gen 4, you might be able to find a brand new 26 somewhere in the low $500 to maybe upwards of $600, depending on where you look, if it's online or if it's at a local gun store. And again, this is speculative, so you might be able to find it a little bit higher, a little bit lower than that, but that's kind of your average ballpark right there. Now, again, stock polymer sights, so if you're adding sights, I would say you're going to add somewhere between $80 and $150, depending on what sights you go with. I, generally speaking, just add that to the bottom line. So for this particular gun, it really came in probably about $650, $675 right there. Now, the VP9SK, you've got a couple of different models. You've got a standard model that's going to have your kind of glowy sights or phosphorescent sights on it, not night sights, but they do glow for a short period of time, and then 2 magazines with it, and I think those are going to ballpark around the $600 mark, somewhere around there, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending on where you look. But then there's the LE version. Now you get the extra magazine and you do get the night sights with it, but we're really talking in the $700, $750 mark right there. So the HK VP9 is going to be a little bit more expensive. So the Glock 26, from a size standpoint and from a value standpoint, does take it, only by a little, but it does take it. But when we talk about the trigger and the ergonomics of the HK VP9SK, at least for me, for this user, those two components right there, I would definitely give to the VP9. The trigger is just a little bit better, and the ergonomics, I think, once again, are second to none. And at the end of the day, when you're shooting a firearm, two of the biggest things, or two of the most important things to a firearm, are going to be trigger and grip, at least I think. You know, you could talk fit and finish and value and all those things all day long, but at the end of the day, if you can't make the trigger work and it's not comfortable for you, I mean, how much are you going to be able to shooting it, really? So for me, at the end of the day, if I could only have one, and it's a tough choice, but I'm going to do it anyways, I would go with the HK VP9SK. At the end of the day, it's a fantastic firearm. It's a little bit more expensive, but I think in this particular case, you get what you pay for, and so I would go with that. So, so once again, if I could only have one, HK VP9SK. I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback and your comments on this, and if you agree or disagree, or if you've got some other firearms that that you would have thrown in the mix here. Looking forward to that. So once again, otherwise, do be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and I will see you next time. Thanks.